Now, Republican presidential candidate Jeb Bush at a town hall meeting in Windham, New Hampshire. During his opening statement, he criticizes opponent Donald Trump over his lack of foreign policy knowledge and says he would be a chaotic president. The former Florida governor discussed a range of issues with residents, including mental health and gun violence prevention, drug addiction, and changing the culture in Washington, D.C. New Hampshire will hold the nation's first presidential primary in February. This is just over an hour.
Oh, you went way over here.
I'm right here, though. I'm not leaving.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to meeting Governor Jeb Bush. This is a fantastic time for everyone. Senator Morse is monitoring my every move. Thank you, Governor, for coming. This is marvelous. Would you all stand and say hello to Governor Bush?
We're going to say the pledge?
Yes, okay. Yes, sir. And will you remain standing for the pledge? Shall we begin, Governor? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. This is yours. Good luck.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it's just before the holiday, but you know, when you know you've had 7 years of on-the-job training going on, the one thing we don't want to happen in the Republican Party is 7 years of on-the-job training. So we want a proven winner. We want someone that's delivered 8 years of tax cuts in Florida and got elected as a Republican with 8 years of tax cuts. That's Governor Jeb Bush, and he will be the next president of the United States. Welcome, Jeb.
Thank you, Jeb. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out. It's 4:30 on a Saturday afternoon. It's not the optimum time for a town hall meeting, but today was going to be the day that I was going to break the record for the most town halls in a single day. We were going to do 5. Unfortunately, we ran into a tragic event. Corporal Andrew Ainsbury, who lived in Dover, was killed in a training exercise, training to be an Army Ranger in Georgia, and his funeral took place this morning at the same time we were going to do our event. So this was to have been our 4th town hall meeting. It's our 3rd, but I'm honored to be here. And before we start, I think it would be appropriate to ask for a moment of silence to pray for the families who lost their loved one, who was preparing to serve us with incredible honor and distinction. Thank you. When I went to the wake yesterday to pay my respects to the family of Andrew, I saw 20 Army Rangers, all dressed up, big, strong, strapping young men that are preparing and training to protect us. And our hat should go off to them. We should be focused on how do we provide the necessary support for these young men and women to keep us safe, because they want to do that. They want to know that a commander-in-chief has their back. They want to know that when they go into battle, they have the best equipment possible to be able to do their job effectively. They want to know that the next President of the United States will rebuild the military in terms of spending, will make the necessary investment in the 21st century military warfighting. They want to know if the lawyers are going to be taken off the backs of the warfighters, because today that is the case. This president has actually put so many restrictions on top of the warfighters that the policy of containment as it relates to ISIS in the Middle East is a policy that we lose each and every day. ISIS is not contained when they can take acts of terror in Paris or San Bernardino or take out a plane in the Sinai. They're not being contained, and even if they were contained, the simple fact is that is not the appropriate policy. Every day that they exist is a victory for Islamic terrorism and a defeat for people like us that believe in freedom. Every day that they exist, they can recruit additional people all around the world, including the United States, to take advantage of our freedom, which they believe is our weakness. We need a strategy to destroy ISIS. And I laid out a plan in August at the Reagan Library to do just that. And it takes, for example, arming the Kurds directly, embedding our troops. 3,500 troops are in Iraq right now, embedding some of those troops inside the Iraqi military, re-engaging with the Sunni tribal leaders that were part of the successful surge that created a fragile but secure Iraq on the day that Barack Obama was elected president. Creating a safe zone, a series of safe zones in Syria, so that the 4 million refugees that exist in these camps and now going to Europe, we won't create a breeding ground for Islamic terrorism for the next generations. We would allow a safe harbor for them and allow us to build a Sunni-led force of moderate Muslims that would do the job of leading the country in a post-ISIS and post-Assad world. It means a no-fly zone, so the brutality of the Assad regime stops barrel bombing innocent people to the tune of now close to 300,000 people. The insecurity that exists there is a direct threat to our national security, and I laid out this plan, getting the lawyers off the backs of the warfighters, taking away the funding stream for ISIS. It is a complex challenge, but a detailed plan is necessary, and someone that has the fortitude and will to carry it out. Donald Trump's idea is, 2 months ago, he says that ISIS is not our fight. Really? Islamic terrorism is not a threat to the United States? Tell that to the family members of the people in San Bernardino. Donald Trump says he gets his foreign policy and military advice from the shows. Really? The commander-in-chief, someone who's aspiring to be president of the United States, just turns on the television on Sunday morning and thinks that's enough to be able to lead this extraordinary country? Donald Trump is all excited that Vladimir Putin thinks he's a good man, and he rewards Vladimir Putin with praise as well. Really? A man who believes that the United States is in decline and takes every step forward while we step back is a hero of Donald Trump's? Really? He's not a serious person. He's a chaotic candidate, which creates all sorts of fun entertainment for people, but he would be a chaotic president of the United States. We need someone who has a steady hand, who has plans to keep us safe. And here's my commitment to you. I will be a commander-in-chief, not a divider-in-chief or an agitator-in-chief. I will lead this country to a more secure place where we can get to the business of creating prosperity again for our great country. And as it relates to the economy, there's much to be done. Hillary Clinton has given Barack Obama an A, not just a passing grade, an A. You know, maybe she plays this on the curve, perhaps, I don't know. An A really is an A when you have 1 in 10 people that are unemployed or given up work, looking for work altogether? Is it an A when workforce participation rates are lower than they were in the 1970s? It can't be an A when 1 in 7 people are living in poverty. 6 million more people in poverty today than the day that Barack Obama got elected. And it's certainly not an A when 1 in 5 children is on food stamps, and that more businesses are closing than being formed, and that disposable income, the great identifier of prosperity, where we stand, median income, is down $2,300 than the day that Barack Obama was elected. $2,300 in Washington may not be a lot, where you have lifetime protection. You know, you basically get wage increases for showing up. You have more benefits than the private sector. People may not be concerned in Washington because they don't have declines in their income, but $2,300 across the board for this great country means that maybe a child won't be able to go to get quality daycare, or maybe they won't be able to go to college, or maybe you can't buy a car, or maybe you can't save for a rainy day, or maybe you have a mom who has dementia and you can't, and you're the caregiver and you can't take respite care, take days off to be able to provide support, or maybe you can't take a vacation. Whatever it is, $2,300 a year is a whole lot of money. The next president has to fix this mess, and it starts with changing the culture in Washington, D.C. Here's what I believe. I believe we need a balanced budget amendment to force the conversation back to where it needs to be, where government doesn't grow faster than our ability to pay for it. We need term limits. In Florida, we have term limits. I have some friends here in the crowd today. It works. We have talented people that get a chance to take leadership roles where the permanent political class has to take a step back. We need to make sure that lobbyists don't control everything. If you finish your term of service as elected official, you shouldn't go out the back door and start lobbying the people that you were serving with the day before. There should be a 6-year ban on elected officials lobbying. We ought to make sure that there's total transparency to make sure that people have confidence that their government is the servant rather than the master. I know how to do this because I was governor of the state of Florida, where I had a chance to take these ideas, work with the legislature, turn the place upside down, but the net result was we had a lot better government. We did reform lobbying. We do have term limits. We balance budgets each and every year, leaving reserves of $9 billion, more than 35% of general revenue. They called me Veto Corleone because I vetoed 2,200 separate line items in the budget. Not to be mean, not to say that I'm the big dog on the stage. I did it because government should not grow faster than people's ability to pay for it. And in Florida, that was the result. Look, there is a big difference in the philosophy of the left and our philosophy. I believe that everybody has a chance to make a contribution in our society. I believe life is really a gift from God, that it is divinely inspired. And I believe if we created a society where everybody's abilities can be reached to their full limits, their God-given abilities, that nothing will stop the United States. The left believes the opposite in many ways. They believe that life's not fair, that because life's not fair, I'll take care of you with another spending program, another tax, another regulation, dividing our country up by haves and have-nots and all sorts of other ways, that they'll manage your liabilities. For us to win, we need to have an exact opposite view of that. Last year I met Denisha Merriweather. She's a Floridian. She came to campaign actually a couple of months ago here in a town hall meeting. Denisha, when she was young, was held back 2 years in a row in 3rd grade. And I can imagine that she was quite angry. No one ever told her she was capable. She was going to be passed along basically to a dead end. It happens a lot in America. Thousands and thousands of kids don't get the power of knowledge and they're stuck. And then we wonder why the demands on government grow faster than our ability to pay for them. Well, Denisha found out, her godmother found out about the Florida Corporate Tax Scholarship Program. It's the largest voucher program in the country. We created the first, second, and third voucher programs in the country. We turned the whole system upside down. We eliminated tenure for teachers. We reward teachers for performance. They get more pay when they do a good job based on student learning. The teachers union didn't like this at all. In fact, they mortgaged their building when I ran for re-election to try to defeat me and to support my opponent. They lost, they had to sell the building, which I found warmed my heart, to be honest with you, because taking on big political fights is what we need to do in Washington, D.C. We can't stand pat with the things that are broken. I know how to do this because I had a chance to do it, and Denisha was the beneficiary. Her godmother found out about this program, and she got to go to a Christian school. And I know what happened. I wasn't there, but I just know in my heart what happened. In that first week, a teacher put her arm around Denisha, and for the first time in her education life, she was told that she was capable, that she had God-given talents, that God loved her, and so did the teacher, and that together they were going to make sure that she could learn. And Denisha Merriweather overcame the 2 years of being held back. She graduated with her age group. She was the first in her family to graduate from high school and college, and this year she will get a master's degree at the University of South Florida. I believe that we'll be successful politically, and we'll be successful as a nation if we're on the side of the Denishas. I don't know if Denisha is a Republican or a Democrat. It's totally irrelevant. What's important is that she has the same right as anybody else to live a life of purpose and meaning. That she won't have to get in line and be told that somehow she's not capable of living a life of purpose and meaning, that she's a liability, that the government will manage her life for her. Isn't it better to be on the side of people pursuing their own dreams as they see fit, making sure that people have the capacity to achieve earned success? Isn't that the better approach? We're going to win if we're on the side of the Denisha Merriweathers. If we focus on high sustained economic growth and keeping our country safe, we'll win. But if we divide ourselves up, if we allow the loud voices to make it all about them, the narcissist, basically saying, hey, I'm the only guy, don't worry, I'll take care of you, not interested in forging consensus, solving problems, we'll never win. Hillary Clinton will be elected President of the United States, and God forbid that from ever happening. I believe you're looking at the guy that can beat Hillary Clinton, because I have a proven record. Again, it's a record of applying conservative principles in a hopeful, optimistic way with sheer dogged determination to implement them the right way, where everybody has a chance to win. It's not about those that have already made it. It's not about whether you have an R or a D by your name. We need to create a right to rise society again. And that's my mission. And I hope that you'll support my candidacy here in New Hampshire. Look, you all elect presidents. You have a responsibility being first in the nation. And my belief is that you take it seriously, that you want to make sure that we have the right person to win the election in the general election, but also the right person who has the right stuff to be President of the United States. I ask for your support, and I appreciate you coming out for this town hall meeting. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. We got a microphone coming your way.
Okay, I was really impressed to hear about your proposal for a 6-year ban on lobbying.
Yeah.
And some of the people who rake in the most from lobbying are retired congressional staffers and also people who work at the Pentagon, both military and civilian. So I'd really like to know if you would extend that 6-year ban to those people also.
That's a good question. I'd have to look at the impact of that, but there should be total transparency. So if you're meeting with a lobbyist and you're a staffer on a committee of great importance, or you're a big dog inside the Department of Defense and you're being lobbied, there should be 24-hour notice. It should be put on the internet. There should be complete transparency about this. And then people can make up their mind whether it's appropriate or not. And that I think across the board, an open government, a more transparent government is what we need. This president promised the most transparent government in American history, and we haven't gotten it. We've gotten the exact opposite. So the best way to deal with the transparency issue is to open it up. It could be that staffers, that's a revolving door as well. It does make sense to look at it. The other thing we need to do, as it relates to the Defense Department, is make sure there's more than 3 contractors. We've created such a confusing, convoluted procurement system that is lobbied up beyond belief that you have the big defense contractors and the cost is higher. They're aggregators, in effect. All the other parts of the operations, they subcontract out. They use their influence to be able to get these contracts. There's all sorts of legal costs associated with it. The warfighters don't get the equipment necessary at the speed that they should. So one of the other elements is to embrace procurement reform so that we have more contractors and it's based on merit rather than influence. Yes, sir.
My father was sent to war in Afghanistan and Iraq during your brother's administration, and I've seen many people come back with PTSD, and I'm running for office myself.
Where are you running?
Derry.
What are you running for?
State representative. On the promise to take
care. How old are you,
care.
man?
18.
Go for it.
I'm running on the promise to take care of our veterans. I'm wondering what you'd be willing to do to take care of our veterans and how to fix the VA.
Thank you. First of all, go get them. That's fantastic. Secondly, you're going to have to work with the next president to do that, because ultimately this is a federal government responsibility. The state has a role to play. There's a veterans operation in every department in every state. But ultimately, to reform the VA, you need a president committed to it. And here are the things that we laid out in our plan. One, we need career civil service reform. It should not be about the economic interests of the 340,000 employees of the Veterans Administration. It ought to be about the veterans. And right now, it's about their economic interests. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a hearing in the Congress, and this guy had the gall to say, I didn't know that you thought accountability related to firing. That's not how we view it in the Veterans Administration. Well, they sure as hell don't, don't see it that way. There have been 3 people fired with one of the most egregious scandals that exists, which is bonusing people, last year $140 million of bonuses, for reducing wait lists without giving care to veterans. And men and women died. Veterans died because of that. And yet there were bonuses given and only 3 people fired. So number 1, career civil service reform so that there's rewards for a job well done, but there should not be lifetime employment in government. It should not be a career that gives you 40% benefits and wages more than the private sector. There should be 21st century employment practices. Second, veterans should have more choices. The idea that the system is, the only thing that matters is just wrong. If a veteran wants to see a doctor that is their private doctor, they should have the right to do it, far easier than exists today. If they want to go to a clinic or a hospital that's the private one, they should have the right to do that. The Veterans Administration should compete for the services to provide to the veterans. And I guess you know what happens when you provide a competitive environment? Everybody gets better. Because if they don't, they'll wither away. Third, we need procurement reform and employment reform, information technology reform. This entity is a disaster. There's a hospital being built in Aurora, Colorado. Modern hospital, $300 million. That seems to me like a pretty first-rate hospital. It now is at $1.8 billion because the Veterans Administration cannot organize itself out of a wet paper bag. No accountability. Everybody just says the dog ate my homework. The Congress is frustrated because this entity is so insular and unaccountable. You need a president that will accept responsibility when these things happen. Look, when I was governor, we had problems all the time. I'd wake up and read the paper and go, oh my God, another child has been hurt, or a caseworker didn't identify an abuse the right way. Oh my God, I mean, my impulse wasn't to say, oh, how can I figure out a way to make sure that no one blames me? How can I make sure that, the dog ate my homework is the right excuse? How can I blame my predecessor, which, actually has been a common refrain in Washington, if you know what I mean. Instead of rolling up your sleeves, accepting responsibility and solving the problem. And that's my pledge to you. On day one, we'll begin the process to fix the VA, to modernize it, to make sure that it is effective, to empower veterans to make more choices. And at the end of this, we'll have a much better system that could cooperate with states when you're a state legislator and you're working with your executive branch to make sure that the care that they receive is the best. There should be no veteran that is homeless in this country. There should be none. And the long-term disability issues that exist for veterans should be a long-term commitment to solve these things. And the post-traumatic stress, which is now a serious problem, has to be dealt with. All of these things together, we can solve this. It doesn't have to be necessarily all from the top down, but the Veterans Administration is the responsibility of the President, and this President has let us down. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a question, Governor, but I want to make a statement.
Is it a good one?
It's very good, and I won't get you into trouble. I've been a volunteer politically since Truman and Dewey. So
no way.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
48?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
How old are you?
85.
You don't. That's not possible. You're way too young.
I live well.
You do live well.
But I moved. My husband and I retired to New Hampshire in 1986. And
Were you for Truman or Dewey?
I want to tell you what a wonderful staff you have. This is the best staff I have ever worked with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, how much you get paid to say that?
They're great kids.
Yes. You're next. We'll get it next.
Governor, I got 2 questions.
How about a two-part one question?
Okay, well, the first thing you'd already talked about, balanced budget, but I have a bigger question. I'd like to know how long it would take to resolve the $18 trillion. Don't answer it yet. And the second question is, I would like to know how we can protect our borders better. I know there are a lot of things that have to be done, but those are two that truly interest me.
Sure. So the way to balance the budget, which will get us towards a path of reducing the debt rather than just accepting the debt level, is to grow the economy at a far faster rate, have entitlement reform our Social Security supplemental retirement system, cut back on discretionary spending in general, shift power back to the states, and the one reversal of that trend of shrinking government, in my mind, we need to rebuild the military. And whatever it takes to be able to create a secure America has to be the highest priority. Now, we can reform the Defense Department. There are more civilian employees than men and women in uniform. Sure doesn't make sense to me. Their procurement process, as I mentioned, needs to be streamlined. There's lots that we can do to shrink the cost of doing business in the Defense Department, but we've allowed our defense capabilities to flatline. And we need to be modernizing it constantly so that the new threats that exist in the 21st century can be met. So other than that, the rest of government has to shrink. And ultimately you get towards a balanced budget. And the growing economy means instead of 100% of GDP, the debt levels, you get down to a level that is completely manageable. On immigration, this is a unique situation. I've had the same view for the last 4 years. I know that's really kind of remarkable in politics because now everybody they're doing the curly shuffle all the time. Whenever there's a little bit of heat, they change their views. I wrote a book about it called Immigration Wars. It was not what you call a bestseller. You could buy it for $1.99 on Amazon. I encourage you to do it. And chapter 1 lays out exactly what I thought then and what I think now, which is we need to secure the border and we need to deal with people that are here illegally in a way that does not give them a path to citizenship. Securing the border means building fencing where appropriate, not across the board. It is not responsible to say we're just going to build a wall and let Mexico pay for it. Just, memo to file here, Mexico's not going to pay for it, okay? Just, don't be shocked, but that's just not going to happen. But we do need more fencing to make in places where it's appropriate. And the Congress has funded this, and the administration refuses to do it. We need to use technology in a more appropriate way. We have drone technology today. We've been fighting for immigration so long, but drone technology is relatively new. Applying that in the appropriate way. GPS technology has exploded into our lives. There's ways to monitor the border in a way that creates greater security for us. We need to have more Border Patrol agents, and they need to be more forward-leaning on the budget. We need an e-verify system which allows for businesses to check to make sure that people are here legally, which means that you can't forge a Social Security card and say, hey, wink, wink, nod, nod. You have to have a system that is truly verifiable so that, and with penalties for employers that hire illegal immigrants. Across the board, we need to eliminate sanctuary cities. This insidious idea that local governments can avoid fulfilling federal law and endanger their communities. It makes no sense. A targeted approach will create border security, and as it relates to people that are here illegally, the idea of just rounding people up to say, well, trust me, I can do this. 500,000 a month, that's the plan, the Trump plan. 500,000 a month, that is the number of people that interact with our criminal justice system today. It means you double the number of people. It would overwhelm our courts. It would make it impossible to actually carry out the regular business of the courts to keep us safe. I mean, this is not a smart idea. It's not a serious idea. The better idea would be, once you control the borders, is to say, here, come out from the shadows, pay a fine, get a provisional work permit, work. No government assistance. Learn English. Don't commit crimes. And work. And over an extended period of time, you earn legal status, which doesn't mean you have a path to citizenship or cutting in line on people that have been patiently waiting. I don't know of another option that wouldn't cost hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars and wouldn't create real instability for our country. And so that's what I believe we need to do. It's a serious problem, as you all know, here in New Hampshire, not just because of the rule of law. That's important. It's also an important issue because of now the threat of Islamic terrorism. You need to have a controlled border for that. It's also important because of the heroin epidemic that exists. If you can provide very powerful, high-grade heroin at an extraordinarily low price, you're going to continue to see people that are being overprescribed painkillers, resorting to not using opiates, but using heroin. And the tragedy that exists in this state and other places now, it's an epidemic. And so controlling the border has the purpose also of stopping the flow of illicit drugs into our country. Yes?
Thank you, Governor. I was stationed at a nuclear missile site in Germany back in the 70s, so I was a little astounded to hear...
How about the nuclear triad?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. A guy standing on the stage debating with you had no idea what the nuclear triad was, and when consistently asked over and again, what would he do to modernize it, had no answer. Could you fill him in? Could you give us an answer?
Yeah, it was breathtaking. It was breathtaking. I don't know how else to describe it. My face, probably my jaw dropped down. I mean, this is the triad is air, land, and sea launch capabilities to create a deterrent effect that has been extraordinarily effective since the World War II era. And it has brought stability to the world. Trump's advisor or communications director this morning, I believe, said, hey, it's not, not understanding the triads, that's not the big deal. It's making sure you have a president that will use nuclear weapons. No, 15-yard penalty, loss it down. That's not what the objective is. I mean, think about it. This is not a serious man with a serious proposal. And we've allowed for the triad to languish in a sense. We haven't invested in modernizing it. And it's both dangerous not to do that, and we need to make sure that we have this deterrent situation, which means that we need to, our submarine capability, which is perhaps, if I was answering the question, I would have said that's probably the place where we need the greatest emphasis, because the Ohio-class submarines need to be modernized. And they need to be done, it needs to be done now, and we can't wait any longer. So across the board, all of the legs of our deterrence effect is important, but to have a president to not understand the somber responsibilities of having access to the nuclear code, dang, I mean, what, you must have spit up your Diet Coke. This is the point. This is the point. Look, people in New Hampshire are going to have the chance to decide this election in many ways. And the Trump phenomena is one to be respected. He's appealed to people's angst for legitimate reasons. People are angry. But people in New Hampshire are going to have to ask themselves a question. Do they really want a guy who doesn't, he may have thought that the nuclear triad was a tripod or something, a new kind of camera or something. I don't know. But do you really want someone who's entertaining but not a commander-in-chief to be president of the United States? Yes, sir.
And this was actually a very good lead-in. Frequently in senior levels of government, we talk about the grand national strategy. And certainly the Cold War with our grand national strategy of containment is a great example of that. It lasted for 40 years through many changes of who was in the Oval Office, who was leading Congress. And it's something that the American people could relate to, not just in the military with the defense strategy, but with our athletes going up against the Olympics, our Fortune 500 companies and our entrepreneurs, knowing that this is our economic system versus another economic system. My question is, what do you see over the last 20 years has been our grand national strategy, and how might you steer with that grand national strategy? Great
question. I think we've had, the world has transitioned, and I don't think we've transitioned with it. One of the real challenges is we have a mid-20th century world, a government on top of a 21st century world. And you can't, just talk about military strategy for a moment. You can't fight both wars. You can't fight the conventional war of the mid-20th century, the Cold War, and also deal with these asymmetric threats of terror. We need to transfer ourselves to what the new threats are. The new threats are in cybersecurity. The new threats are these nation states that are aggressive. That's still part of the challenge, but we have these emerging threats like ISIS that literally came out of nowhere in the void that was created when we left Iraq. In a period of time that was warp speed from a historical point of view, 30,000 battle-tested terrorists garnering hundreds of millions of dollars now have created a new threat that didn't exist just 3 years ago. And so I think the grand strategy is how do we protect the homeland against these new threats while maintaining some level of support for recognizing America can't just do this alone. You have to build a security arrangement that includes our partners and our allies. We have to lead, but I think the grand strategy is one of American leadership, not in the absence of other people making their commitments as well. So in my vision of how the world looks, I see the support for NATO being an essential part of it. Right now, Russia, Donald Trump's big friend, new buddy, is challenging the notion of NATO, and and they're winning. You see countries inside the NATO alliance that now are, trending towards Putin, towards Russia. My guess is if we do nothing, if we continue down this path of leading from behind and pulling back, that the Europeans will stop the sanctions on Russia for their invasion of Ukraine. And when Ukraine receives that kind of treatment, how do you think that impacts all the rest of the countries in Eastern Europe and Central Europe? The United States has to play a role in these places for security for our own country. And so from the military and foreign policy point of view, I think we can create a new strategy that is kind of a fusion of both the conventional side of this as well as the new threats. And economically, we got to fix, if we're going to lead the world, we have to be an economic superpower, which means that people have to feel like the system works for them. And the great challenge there, I would say, is twofold. One, the rapid nature of change because of innovation and automation creating real challenges for us to create higher wage jobs, and globalization kind of accelerating all of this as we go along. We have these trends that we have not adjusted to. And a serious strategy needs to recognize the world as it is, not as we want it to be, or we're not going to close down there are people on the left and right that basically say, we'll just build a wall. A protectionist wall. We'll just look inward. Well, no, that doesn't work. Looking inward means you're going to lose. You're going to lose wages. You're going to lose job opportunities. We have to actually be competitive in a world where the pace is much faster. And so a strategy as it relates to prosperity has to be radically changing how we train and educate, simplifying our tax code and taking power away from Washington, moving to an outcome-based regulatory system that focuses on every well-intended rule having some benefit for society, but also some detriment to our economy, and having an honest discussion of whether every one of these rules is appropriate, because they're not. We're stifling our ability to compete, and if we can't compete, we'll lose our will, and if we lose our will, we can't lead the world, and when we pull back, we see what happens. It's ugly. That's a phenomenal question. Yes, sir. Hey.
Hi. Edward Snowden leaks, do you think those were good or bad for the country? And then one more quick question after that.
Bad.
If you weren't, okay. And why? And if you weren't running for president, who would you vote for?
That's a trick question. Why is it bad? He violated the law, for starters. And secondly, he broke the law. And thirdly, he jeopardized national security interests for our country. And fourthly, there are men and women in positions that work for agencies with 3 letters that now are in jeopardy. He has made it impossible, not impossible, he's made it extraordinarily hard for us to reestablish the relationships that are necessary for our intelligence communities to be able to do their jobs. And here's the net effect of this is now we see the impacts of it. So now you have a situation where it might be nice to know, looking back, who this couple in San Bernardino were interacting with. I'd like to know. I hope that the President of the United States would like to know. That security breach that took place makes it harder, the Snowden security breach makes it harder to have a conversation about this with maybe the German intelligence authorities or the French. And now we see efforts to create encryption so that the terrorists actually use the same technology to protect their messaging that others feel compelled to do as well. And now we see the European countries saying you can't go backdoor through these platforms. We're going to prohibit it. We've created a different relationship where there's no trust anymore, and that could be the longest lasting legacy of Snowden's efforts. He should come back and serve time. He's not a hero. He's not going to be on the cover of Time magazine, I don't think. So the other question, like, I don't know. There are a lot of good people running. I have a lot of respect for many of them. I just think I'm the best. And I don't say that. I feel the looming presence. I'm training myself to say things like that because I was brought up in a way that you don't toot your own horn. So the minute I said that, I could feel it. There was a looming presence of Barbara Bush behind me, and she was about ready to whack me across the head. So I'm sorry, Mom. But I do think my record as governor and my life experience, 32 years in the private sector, 8 years, where we accomplished more. I mean, the people in Washington, did you hear the debate? They started talking like jibber jabber. I passed an amendment and I was thinking about killing something, but I actually was for it. I mean, it made no sense. They've lost their way. And people look at this and hear this stuff and they go, it doesn't make any sense to me. That's the problem. We need people that actually know how to get things done. And governors do that. They do it regularly. They have to make tough decisions. And so if I had my favorite candidate, it would be someone who was a governor, a reform-minded conservative, consistently so, who served in a big state that handled big challenges and had ideas for the future. Oh, that's me. Yes, ma'am.
So many times during elections over the decades, we see candidates making promises that they want to fulfill, but then their hands get tied because Congress doesn't make it easy for them, but throw in difficulties. So I'm just wondering, when you get into that position, how do you want to handle that, and what will make it possible, and how can you directly answer that without beating around the bush?
Yeah, so great question. Here's the first step. The first step is assume that people that disagree with me don't have bad motives. Because now it looks like every time someone disagrees with someone in Washington, the first impulse is to say that they're bad, that they're wrong, not just wrong, but they have bad motives, that they're part of, the president's classic example would be the Iranian deal, where in the midst of trying to get it past Congress, he said that people that opposed his nuanced approach to the Iranian agreement were in cahoots with the Death to America crowd. Well, with all due respect, Mr. President, you're the one negotiating with the Death to America crowd. That agreement was a bad agreement. He should respect people that have a disagreement with him. And I think there's a tendency in Washington today to push down anybody that disagrees with you to make yourself look better. And the net result is there's a gap of trust that doesn't make it possible to get things done. There are too many lessons in history in our great country where the opposite took place. I mean, we've had 240-year run here, I think, as a republic. Pretty good run. I'd say the greatest run of any country ever created. And out of that period of time, we've probably had 10 years of massive dysfunction. Maybe I can't tell you in the 19th century, they had food fights and duels and stuff, but it seemed to work. Now, they brag about an omnibus bill that no one read, that's 1,000+ pages long, dealing with $1 trillion of spending. Some good things and I'm sure some ugly things in there, because they didn't shut down government. That's how low the bar is. So how do you start? You start by assuming that people on the other party don't have bad motives, and you at least listen to them, determine if you can find common ground. Tip O'Neill did it with Ronald Reagan. And they secured Social Security solvency for now, 40 years, almost 40 years. My dad did it with Democrats. Bill Clinton did it with Republicans. My brother did it with Democrats for a lot of the legislation. We've got to restore that. You can't make democracy work unless the bigger the challenge, the more important it is that both parties have a role to play in it. You cannot make our democracy work by jamming it down the other team's throat. We've had Dodd-Frank, the stimulus, and Obamacare. Not a single Republican vote in any of those three cases, and even to this day, they may remain unpopular because the president didn't take the time to try to forge consensus. So that's my answer to you. I had one quick story. I had a friend of mine who's a United States Senator who got invited to the White House to have dinner with the president up in the residence. Pretty cool. I've been there, it's nice. It's a nice place. Good history, you know, you got things on the walls, the food is good, there's tradition. It's the White House, for crying out loud. It's like, it's the center of this extraordinary country in some ways. And so he's going up to in the rickety elevator with the usher and the eager aide, and the young aide says, "This is exciting. You're the first Republican that the president has dined with during his time." And I'm thinking, this is year 5. Really? I mean, if you could get the White House for a day and you had something you really wanted to get done and you could invite someone to have a nice meal and a glass of wine and maybe go out on the Truman balcony and put your arm around them and say, "Schmidlap, I need your help on this," you know, and look at the Washington Monument, I think it's a pretty good place to actually forge consensus, don't you think? But this president never felt compelled to do it. And that's just wrong. That's a missed opportunity for him and for our country. Yes?
I've been concerned about the State Department and the fact that more and more of the decisions appear to be being made out of the Oval Office,
yeah,
and in the crowd that hangs, you know, that they accumulate. I would love to see. In fact, I kind of think about the State Department like I do about the VA. You know, that we need a more professional state, and we need. Like, how many times have they held the press conferences to explain the foreign policy decisions that they're making and where they're headed, and you know, and a lot of that is being taken to the president's voice. In other words,
yeah,
he's the one speaking for the State Department. Would you be able to be encouraged to form a more professional, more active State Department?
Great question. Here's what I believe. The NSC, the National Security Council, has, I think, doubled in size in the last generation. And this president has consolidated more power inside the White House for foreign policy than any president prior. And it's allowed foreign policy to be politicized. The Benghazi issue is a good example of it, where it was clear that this was a terrorist attack. And Hillary Clinton sent an email to her daughter and to the Prime Minister of Egypt the day after the attack saying just that. But they prolonged the lie for as long as they could to make sure that it didn't damage the president's re-election chances. Well, that's not how the presidency should work. You should appoint men and women of real talent in the Department of Defense and Department of State, build a team where the National Security Council isn't the place where decisions are made, where the president calls in and kind of creates the political solution to the mess or whatever. You use the National Security Council and the head of it as a mediator for disputes, and you allow for a hearty discussion about what the policy should be. And the president ultimately has to make the choice, but I would shift power back to the DOD and the Department of State, and I would hold them to account. My biggest problem with the Department of State is that, man, I mean, they operate sometimes without enough accountability. If you give them accountability and you professionalize it, you'll get a good result. But if you allow them to just kind of run wild, they're not necessarily carrying out the actions of the president. Yesterday, John Kerry, I guess was in Moscow, and he said something that was breathtaking. He said that the United States does not have an interest in regime change in Syria. Well, that's news to everybody in our country because that has been the official policy of the United States. I mean, I don't know, all of a sudden he's just like going to rewrite history and ignore the fact that they had one policy. The president, I think, last time he spoke said that the policy was regime change, and yet now he says that Russia and the United States have similar interest in providing security in Syria and that Assad, in effect, will have to stay. That is just, you've got to have leadership in the White House. The president has to lead as it relates to foreign policy, but it ought to be done in a way where once you establish what the vision is and what the strategy is, that you empower the State Department and Defense Department to carry out their world. I think you could cut the NSC in half, and that would send a pretty powerful signal of what you're trying to get to. I think it's a great point. Yes, sir.
Wait for the mic.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Donald Trump would lose in a complete landslide to Hillary?
Yes.
And if so, how do you show those current Trump supporters that in reality they're not supporting Trump, they're supporting Hillary?
Well, it's a great point. Look, I respect the fact that that people are supporting Mr. Trump because they're angry. And I totally respect the fact that they're angry for good reason. Washington's broken. It starts with people are angry because the president hasn't led, and then Washington itself is dysfunctional, and the Republicans in charge of Congress made a big overpromise when they gained control. And I think people saw this, and now they see no big results, and they're quite upset. And Trump basically is, understands that, and with his grandiosity has garnered their support. So the challenge, I think, is to make sure that people understand that candidates that may have more detailed plans, more relevant plans to solve these problems, understand why people are angry, and then make the case that just having someone that understands your anger isn't enough. You got to have someone that can fix these things that are broken. You have to have people that have the ability to bring people together. Look, one of the tools of leadership I've learned through trial and error through my life is one of the powerful things that you can accomplish is knowing what you don't know. The minute you get to that point and have the humility to be curious enough to learn is when you can become a leader. I'm afraid Mr. Trump doesn't have that leadership skill. I mean, he's been the front-running candidate now for 5 months, and not knowing what the nuclear triad is, I mean, he's not moving forward, he's going back as it relates his knowledge. And so I think people begin to see that and realize as you get closer, we're electing a president, not an agitator-in-chief, but someone who actually needs to be a commander-in-chief and bring us together on the economic side as well. But beyond question, Trump loses to Hillary Clinton. Beyond question. Yes, ma'am.
Mass shootings that we've had for the last several years. It does not seem to be getting better. It seems to be getting worse. And I know it's a very difficult problem, obviously not one fix. But what are your ideas for attacking this?
Yeah, so it's certainly more visible. It's certainly more visible. I don't know if we have more mass shootings. It appears that way. I just don't know what the facts are. And it's so debilitating and sad to see it. And people I think, are scared for all sorts of reasons. The terror threat is a real one, and people are scared. Then you see the violence, and you see disturbances in the big urban areas where you have the conflict between police and kids that don't seem to have any hope about what the future looks like. You get a sense that we're kind of unraveling, and it's deeply troubling to me personally, because this is not the country that I know we need to be. But if you look at the specifics of why it is that people do what they've done, outside of the radicalization question of San Bernardino, the question, say, of Sandy Hook or these other places, the question is mental derangement. These people are deeply mentally ill, they spiral out of control, and then they have access to weapons in all sorts of ways. There hasn't been any kind of one pattern about how they access weapons, but the one common denominator is they're crazed, they're deranged, they're sick, and they act on this sickness in a way that is devastating. So there should be, at a minimum, a consensus about how we need to figure out how to build a deeper understanding of and a deeper network for mental health challenges. How do you interact? How do you identify someone before it's too late? How do you give them the kind of medical help that they can get? How can you make sure that people that are deranged can't access guns to buy guns directly? Some cases they have, some cases they haven't, and I'm not sure we're totally committed to that yet. But we need to be spending more money on mental health networks across the country as well. And people need to re-engage with, we need to re-engage with ourselves. I find it incredible that a couple had been radicalized for 3 years or something, and that they were building pipe bombs in their garage, and that they were co-workers, you know, that one of the man was working and making $60,000 and he was a well-regarded employee, and that no one knew that they were organizing this incredibly violent act. Somehow we have to do better at reconnecting all of us together. I don't have an answer to that, but the internet actually creates a barrier for that. You can live your life basically online and never really interact with people anymore. And once you get out of control, all of your thoughts get validated by the marginal side of the internet. And this is a huge problem. It's something that there's no easy answer, as you said. I don't have an answer, but I think you start with the mental health place. That seems to be the common denominator of all these tragedies. One more.
I happened to see your father when he first started his campaign in Atlanta, Georgia years ago, so I want to thank you and your family for providing all the services for us and also for being there to support the American people. My question is, my son happens to be a pharmacy manager, so we hear about this all the time. Drug addiction in New Hampshire is a very significant issue, mostly heroin.
Yeah.
So other than securing the borders and having another war on drugs, what specific steps can you take as president to stem the tide?
Very good. First of all, when I was governor, we created a strategy to deal with this in a comprehensive fashion, because Florida was actually was the source of importation of illicit drugs for a long while, and we were successful. The federal government particularly, was so successful that the flow of drugs diverted to Mexico. We were on the front lines, and I saw firsthand, if you go to family court and to drug court, where my daughter went, I mean, I had firsthand knowledge of that, you see the challenges of addiction. I mean, in my case, it was deeply personal. I was a very public figure in the fourth largest state, and my precious daughter had to go through this challenge that she faced in a very public way. It wasn't easy. But we created a strategy that dramatically reduced drug abuse. And the way you do it is to, first of all, create a strategy. I looked at it as a business opportunity. In the first week, the former president of the Senate hosted a summit where we brought all the treatment providers, all of the prevention coalitions, law enforcement together for the first time in the state's history to say, you create the strategy. I will take the lead, and my wife will take the lead in going to the legislature, and they'll fund the strategy. And we'll benchmark it. So we actually did it. We said, here's the strategy. We called it the Forefront Strategy. We created prevention coalitions in every community, all 67 counties. We expanded by 25% drug treatment because it was underfunded, and that has to be part of the answer. I've learned here in New Hampshire that there are other means other than just plain treatment that are helpful as well to give people confidence, interacting with people going through the exact same thing, that there's a restorative part of this, a network part of this that needs to be built, and places that don't have it aren't going to work as well. And cops, law enforcement people need to be fully engaged in this. And there needs to be a federal, state, and local effort to deal with interdiction of heroin in New Hampshire. There is the HIDA, I think it's called, the high impact drug areas. The federal monies exist, but this should be far more coordinated. So controlling the border is part of it, but there needs to be a much greater network between local, state, and federal agents as well. The one thing I would add to this now, because your epidemic here is principally because of prescription drug use converting to heroin use. So the gateway drug is one that is legally offered. I think the Medical Association in New Hampshire, I'd love to get your views on this, I think they need to be engaged. We are over-prescribing like nobody's business. It is crazy. 90% of all the opiates that are prescribed legally in this world are prescribed in America. And we're creating, look, you can't, if people have issues, removing pain doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And creating a bunch of addicts certainly isn't the solution to this. And so I think there needs to be a lot more regulation and training for doctors not to just say, here, have another pill. In fact, the FDA just approved the use of opiates for children. This was like 6 months ago. That makes no sense. I think we need to press the pause button on that. And the final thing is, illicit drugs by legal prescription drugs, there ought to be a tracking system that you can use to make sure, or there are people that pharmacy shop and doctor shop, and there are pharmacists that view this as a way to make a lot of money, and doctors sadly as well overprescribing. But you need a database to be able to track that. In Florida, when we did this, after I left, this was done post my time, there was dramatic reductions in the use of, the illegal use of prescription drugs. I mean, well, it went down like 90% or something, right? The members of the legislature did an extraordinary job, and so it's got to be a comprehensive approach to this. Thank you all very much. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.